One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin, and can I remind those who are not familiar with the programme that Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fierce to Hear and Film and Fubble. We bring you the best in Scéalta, and we bring you the best every week. And my guest this evening is a veteran journalist. Maybe you don't like the word veteran.
Don't mind at all.
You are a commentator, a journalist, an author, all of the above, and you've done all of that sort of work. You've been through the highlights and the dark nights of conflict and of progress and all of it. It's Mervyn Jess. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for inviting me.
And I suspect that when we mention your name, because you haven't been about as such, you're not on the box anymore. But it's a bit like me. People will say, I wonder where you went to. So you describe yourself as born in the spud capital of the world, Colombia. And I want to take you to that. I also want to talk a wee bit about that horrible period of conflict when you were a journalist, and quite often you were among the first people to the scenes of terrible events. And if you don't mind, what I'd like to ask you is just from a human point of view, because journalists are human, the impact on that. So take me from boy to veteran, if you don't mind. So Cumber, you're born in Cumber.
Born in Cumber, raised in Cumber, still in Cumber. Never felt the need to leave Cumber. So yes, I did say to you earlier about being a spud capital of the world, because you're growing up in Cumber during the school holidays. You went out and picked spuds, because that's how you made a bit of extra money.
Hard work,
or any money at all. It was hard work. Yeah, it was hard work. So spud picking was the big thing for kids at school during those summer holidays, and that's what we did. But again, I didn't leave the town. I met my future wife in the town, Lynn, yes, and then we had two children, Amy, the eldest, and Melanie, the youngest, who are both now young grown-up women, both living out of Northern Ireland and working in London, where they've been for a number of years following their college time over there. So, but we're still there, and I've never really felt the need to leave the town, to tell you the truth, because it's where I'm from, and I always feel if I went from it, I'd feel out of place elsewhere. But I'm sure Cumber's a fairly, shall we say, unionist town.
Yeah. I
mean, the flags and bunting are out at the moment, post 12th and ready for the last Saturday in August for the black men.
Yeah.
So it's always been that way, and my father was a member of the Orange Order, and as I was a young lad, I used to carry the strings and the banner, because that's what the lads did who were the kids of the members of the lodge. And the 12th was a big day for us. It was a big day out. You got to wear a wee collarette, and you got a flower in your collarette, and you thought, this is great. Chips, ice cream, walking people out to watch you. It was great stuff growing up. But that was then, and then as you get a bit older, obviously you get a job and you move into whatever form of work you go into, and mine was journalism. And then I sort of grew up quite rapidly through that, because that's when I first came across you, obviously in the early 80s during the hunger strikes.
When I was just a kid.
When you were just a kid, but I mean, I was just feeling my way into journalism.
Don't tell me the journalist story just at the moment, because I'm interested. I spoke to someone the other day, and I was trying to suss out, Cumber, it isn't the metropolis of the world. It's a beautiful place and lovely people and make great mash, I'm sure, and all of the above. Journalism, was it your first port of call? Were you always going to be a journalist?
Well, as opposed to at the start of it, like a lot of people of my age who didn't go on to university and academic education, if you like, third level education. I didn't, because I failed my 11 plus, so I had a different route to go. And a lot of my contemporaries, if you like, were looking at various things, like for instance the shipyard.
Yeah,
funny enough,
course, yeah.
Shorts. And if you get into shorts, that was always seen as being, well, you're working in the aircraft. That's a good career. Others working into Mackies, engineering types, that sort of stuff. Others working into telecoms and what have you. And I did have a little bit of a dabble with that. In fact, I did go to shorts. First of all, I went to Harlan Wolff on a school trip, familiarisation trip.
Yeah.
Did the old workshops. Thought, whoa, it was a bit heavy industry for me. Before that, actually, we were taken up to the old Andrews Mill, which operated in Cumber for a long time. Right. The Andrews family, obviously, the builder, the designer of the Titanic, Thomas Andrews, his family owned and ran the mill. A big employer in Cumber for generations. Was taken up there on a secondary school trip to be shown, well, would you like to perhaps work in this environment? And I thought, no, I'm out of that too. So that left sort of like shorts. So I went to Shorts and we went in there and did a familiarisation tour, and then we were asked, anybody interested in an engineering career, well, give it a go. Sat the exams, blah, 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 did the whole thing. Passed, was offered the apprenticeship. And at that time, I had sort of dabbled a little bit in journalism. I'd written a few stories for the local Newton Irish Chronicle, my local paper, and they'd been published. And the editor had said to me, look, you know, you're showing a bit of flair here for the writing, because I was always pretty good in school in English and stuff like that, and grammar and what have you. So he said, if you were to go on and do a journalism course at the College of Journalism, as it was in Belfast then, we could look at maybe giving you a job. I was too late to get into that. I'd missed it by a year. It would have put me back another year, and that was like whatever it was, a 2 or 3 year course. And I thought, I can't really be not working for that length of time. I need to start. I'm the eldest son here. I need to start earning money and throwing something into
Set an example.
Into the kitty, you know, because I mean, we weren't we weren't a wealthy family, you know, we were working class people. So I just said, right, okay, I can't do that. But what I could do is I could go to a secretarial course, and I could do shorthand and typing up to the level you wanted at. Would that suffice? Would you consider me then if I was to do that? And the editor at the time says, yes, we will do that, but you need to have it up to a certain level.
Yeah.
So I had to make a big decision. I had to either go for the job in Shorts, which was offered to me, with, at that stage, it was like a cast iron guarantee of a good job, with a real
For life.
For life, you know, with a good wage. You were, even as an apprentice, you were earning good money. Or do you take a wee gamble here and such, and you go after that thing which you've sort of been harbouring in the back of your mind about the journalism? So I had to make a call, and I had to think about it over the weekend, because I phoned the guy who was the recruiter in Shorts and said, look, here's my dilemma. And he said, think about it over the weekend and ring me first thing Monday morning, because obviously there's other people behind you who will then be offered the post. So I did think about it the weekend, and as I was going to my technical college to do the course I was on, I had to go to a phone box in Bangor in the top of Main Street and make that call before I went into class. And I can tell you, that was probably one of the most difficult calls I had to make at that time of my life, to say to Short Brothers and Harlands.
Big decision for a young man.
Thank you very much, but I'm going to go down the journalism route. And the man on the other end of the phone said to me, look, thank you for calling, and I wish you all the best.
You may be surprised. Someone said that I was asking in terms of what, not so much the qualifications, but nearly the frame of mind you need to be a good journalist. Because journalism is like every profession. There are good journalists, there are journalists, and there are those who are just there. And they said, he can tell a great story. And I said, really? And they said, more important, he can see a great story. So I want to return to that. So obviously that spell, that summer period that you worked for the local paper, you must have just kind of sparked, and somebody said, this young lad, because you were very young, you were 17 or something.
Yeah, 17, coming on 18, yeah.
Yeah, this young lad has got ability. So it wasn't maybe just as coincidental as you may have thought.
Well, Norman Bowl was my editor. I mentioned Norman Bowl's name because he's a long-time editor of the Newton Irish Chronicle. Mm. You may or may not have known Norman Bowl as a sports reporter.
I do.
He also played table tennis for Ireland. He was also a full-time referee. And my recollection, if it's correct, is this, that he refereed the match between Belfast Celtic, the last match between Belfast Celtic and Linfield, to decide either the cup or the league that year, and he gave a penalty in the dying seconds.
Yeah.
And a riot broke out.
Absolutely.
And one of the players got pulled off the pitch and into the crowd and was beaten up and was pretty badly injured.
Obviously guns produced as well,
yeah.
from the stands.
That was the last match I understand that Norman ever was to referee, but he then went on to write every week for the New Irish Chronicle on Ards and Bangor football clubs. He was the guy who probably saw something and said, right, we're going to give him a shot here and see how he gets on.
But let me just clear his name. He wasn't the person we were speaking to. Someone else. And you can work out at a later stage over a glass of wine who it was. Because I'm like you, I'm not going to divulge any of our sources. But let me,
I never divulge a source.
Okay, absolutely. Let me just kind of move you on. You're a cub reporter. You're working very hard. You're covering deaths, births, weddings, all the above and everything. And you're doing all of that work. What did you know? You know, sometimes we take jobs or we take decisions and then we either live to regret them or we spend the rest of our lives convincing ourselves that it was the right decision at the right time. Did you know, I'm a journalist, this is where I am, this is what I'm going to be?
Yeah, there was no doubt about it. Once I was in it, that was it, and I was fully committed.
What year was that?
That was 1977.
Okay, so it was a bad year.
It's a bad year, but I was working for a local paper at that stage,
Yeah,
so
sure.
there were a few bad things happened. You know, like for instance, a few bad things was some people were shot
Yeah.
dead, usually off-duty members of security forces
Yeah.
in the area. There were a few bombs went off in the area that the newspaper covered. So while I had, and then of course, what really brought the thing to the top of the troubles to the top of my agenda, if you like, was the bombing at Le Mans.
Yeah, yeah.
And I actually was out that night in Cumber in a local hostelry and saw all the ambulances flying up the street and wondering, in the fire brigades, wonder what's on tonight. And don't forget, in those days there was no like live news 24 hours. There were no mobile phones.
I was just about to say
It was
that.
word of mouth that got around, so nobody knew. And we continued on our night out with some of the guys, you know, as you do.
Yeah.
Thinking, well, it's maybe there's a fire in a farm up the road or somewhere, whatever. Then word trickled through to where we were to say there's been a bombing at Le Mans, and I says what? And yeah, and then somebody says, well, there's a late bulletin on tonight on the BBC at about sometime 10:15 or something, which didn't have in those days. So I had the camera. Actually, the tragic thing about it was, I had a camera home to work that Saturday, because I had been interviewing the week before some people who were the collie dog breeders, and they were one of the groups that were in the rooms that night for their annual prize distribution,
Yeah.
and they were probably in line to win a major prize, and I was going to be interviewing them prior and then after they've won the prize with their dogs. But I had the thing home, the camera home, to go and do that, and it was the Friday night whenever the bomb happened, and I actually went home and took my father's car and drove up the road to Le Mans with that camera, which I had home with me to take pictures of the person who was hopefully picking up a prize, who was in that fireball. And on the way up the road, I had with me a friend whose parents were also up there, because they had been at the motorcycle club event. And I can tell you, it was a tense time going up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There were actually people walking up that road, and we stopped to give one of them a lift in their pajamas from the town of Cumber, who had people up there. They just left, when they heard about this, left and headed for it. And when I got there, the fire was out, but everybody was there, and they were still dampening down, and there was a couple of fire crews from all over the place, but also fire crews from Newton Arch, who I knew over the years in the Chronicle, who I knew the guys were there. And I said, look, I need to get some pictures here. And I was able, actually, in those days, when the cordons go up and everybody's kept miles back, there was such pandemonium and people just in a state of confusion. I was able to drive virtually right up to the front of that place and get out of the car with my friend, who was in this stage, when he saw it, hysterics, because he thought his parents were in that. And walked right in, past all the security guys with the camera and my little Newton Arch Chronicle press card to say, I'm here to take, and I was shaking like a leaf because I'd never seen anything like this. And I saw the guy from the local fire station. I says, look, I'm going to take some pictures. He says, don't move any further, stand there. And I says, why? He says, if you move any further that direction, you're going to you're going to stand on top of somebody. And I looked, and all I could see was just black, burnt debris and charred wood. But he says, you'll not see it, but in amongst that, and that was something that really struck me at that point, because I'd never had that experience before.
But that was nearly the beginning of 30 years of horror stories and assassinations and all of that. And I've often wondered, I want to talk about Dart for a while. I know you're involved with Dart. Is it Dart?
Dart, yeah.
But I want to talk about that for a while. But, you know, that sight for a young man obviously was horrendous. The BBC came soon after that, or
no, they didn't come until my journalistic career was sort of punctuated with incidents of horrific death and injury and whatever, you know, involving all sides.
Yeah, of course.
So there was that, but I was in downtown radio then for 8 years. I joined downtown just after that incident, obviously at the Le Mans, and when I went into downtown, that was at a whole new level, because at that stage it was like news on the hour or the half hour or as soon as you get it. We were out there competing with the BBC and to an extent the rest of the world, trying to get our news on first, as you probably will remember.
Yeah, we do, of course.
And of course, in the early 80s, the hunger strikes were the thing, and you know, we're working through that. And most of my reporting was out in the streets to do the fallout, riots, protests, marches, relatives of people who had
Reports
been
from the prison. And
yes,
all,
all that sort of thing. So that's what we were involved with at that stage.
Where or when did Lynn come along?
She came along just at between the Chronicle and the Downtown thing, so right back then, just at late 70s, early 80s. So she was there
through that horrendous period.
Through that.
I keep dropping somebody's in by virtue. I was asking about the awards that you got and all of that there, and they said awards. Lynn should have got the awards for putting up with them. So was it a case that you were? I'm just wondering how you deal with these things. And my own experience, both have been a Belfast City Councillor and a public representative. These things are very hard to deal with sometimes. But you were called out. You say, obviously you're called out to cover shootings, deaths, families' griefs, historics, and all of that. And did you go home and say to Lynn, I'm never going back. This is what I've just saw.
No.
Or was it you holding on to these things and keeping them in yourself?
98% of it was internalised, easily, maybe sometimes 100%, because I couldn't tell that stuff at home to anybody, not just Lynn, but anybody else. I mean, my relatives, my parents who were alive. My father was alive then.
Rosie?
And my mother, Rose, yeah, who's still alive.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something I talked about at all. I just dealt with it and brought it back and kept it inside. Now, some people say that's the wrong way to deal with it, but that was the way I dealt with it. Now, I'm not saying I kept all of it inside. When you were working in places like a tightly knit newsroom, as Downtown was, Downtown Radio News, not a lot of people, but everybody working flat out, you sort of had if you like, an avenue of release with them. So that would involve, and it's old hat and an old school, I know, but you just go out and just drink. Just not drink to oblivion, just go out and drinks, and then just drink until you're able to sort of let it out in some way or other. Now, black humour was a big thing.
For us all?
For everybody. Now, I'm not saying we were mocking the dead in any way. It wasn't like that. It was just, there was always at the back of something, there was always something you said, when that happened, I had to bite my tongue. Because you could see how ludicrous it was, and that particular thing that was said at that particular time. Yeah. So that you'd make a bit of fun out of certain things, but not of people who had lost their lives.
Well, I suspect that the human aspect of it is that's how you deal with the intensity of it. And I know on one occasion when you went to cover a shooting, the family mistook you for a doctor.
Yeah, it's true.
Tell me that story.
I got the call, as we did, this was Downtown days as well, and we got a call to say there's been a shooting, and it was in a very isolated area. I'll not say where, because spare the family's feelings in that one. And it was dark, nighttime, and I drove off, and I had my recording device in a black bag with a shoulder strap, which I carried over my shoulder. And you wouldn't know what was in the bag, obviously, just recording device was in a bag. And I drove around to this. I knew the area it was in because I phoned somebody in the area who would have known, and I was told it'll be around there if that's who you think the person was. And drove around, and because there wasn't much in the way of civilization there, you could see car lights going down a lane, and you're thinking, well, this has to be it. Yeah. So I drove down the lane too, and my reason for being there was to go up as best I could, because this is what we had to do at that time, and knock a door and say, look, I'm sorry I'm here, but I'm here for a reason, and the reason is to ask you, would anybody wish to speak about the person who's lost their lives? Because we're getting to the point where we're just saying, and victim number 6 died yesterday, and victim number 7 died tomorrow. Trying to humanise the people, that's very difficult, to do, and also it's even more difficult for the family to have somebody come knock the door, and at that particular moment, find it within themselves to speak to a person like me. So anyway, you go down, and I saw all the cars parking up, and there was a guy standing at the door, and there's people coming in, they were sort of shaking hands. He said, this has to be it. So I got out of the car, put my bag over my shoulder and went up, and I said, is this the house of the mother, I think it was, of the victim? Yeah. And he says, yes, come this way. I thought, right, and he led me straight into the house, past everybody standing out in the hall, into the room, the sitting room, where the immediate family were all sitting around with one member of the family, and I thought to myself, this isn't right. Something's not right here. And I turned to him and he said, that's her there, doctor. Can you give her something?
Thought you were a doctor.
Well, I tell you, extricating yourself from a situation like that requires nimble footwork and also the right thing to say at that stage. And I think from memory, I just took the guy who brought me in and took him out of that room and the earshot of anybody with that, took him into the horses. I'm not a doctor, and I explained what, and I left the house at that point because I knew at that stage this is as far as this goes.
You mentioned there, and sometimes people I think are not really aware. Well, they should be aware, but you're a journalist, you're a human being, you're a father of 2 girls. I have an Amy as well, by the way. You're a partner, you've all of that. So you're outside of your job title, you're a person. And I've asked this question of a number of high-profile journalists. Were you the subject of people saying, I wouldn't have covered the story like that, or I heard you on the TV or the radio the other night, and you said, did you get kind of, I don't mean harassed, but were people not shy about telling you how you do your job?
You mean like constructive feedback, Joe?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but you can say that.
Yes, I did.
And did it affect you?
Well, no, well, it's not that it doesn't. You have to think about what people are saying to you, right? Because you're out doing the job, you're trying to do it to the best of your ability, as professionally as you can. But there are times when obviously you bump into your audience because those are the people you're broadcasting to, and they're going to have a view, and that's absolutely their right to have a view, and I cannot alter that. And sometimes they'll go, "That was great," and sometimes they'll say something else.
Yeah, of course.
And I've got to take that in the chin. But if I had £1 for every time somebody, because given you understand the area which I grew up in and was living in, I've had £1 for every time somebody said to me, I don't know how you managed to stand there and interview Jerry Adams without putting your arms around his neck and closing your hands around his neck. I'm sort of going, look, just this is the way it's. This is the job. This is how it works. I'm not there to. So yes, you would get a lot of that, and that's human nature, and I've got to explain this is my job, and you're not going to like everything I do, and that's just the way it is, I'm afraid.
Tell me about the call from the BBC, Big Time. This is it.
Well, that came after, again, as I say, punctuated by moments of high tragedy.
Yeah.
That came after the Enniskillen bombing, which I covered. I was actually, I think I'm right in saying, I'll tell you the story about Enniskillen. Every year for about 4 years prior to Enniskillen, I had done the service in the Scéalta City Hall, and I did the live commentary for Downtown Radio, which the service lasted about 40 minutes. So I would do the live commentary. So I was doing my live commentary as you do, and I had an engineer with me who sat out in the wee radio car, which was at the back of the Scéalta on the main street, and I had a set of headphones on the microphone, and it was all live, and we just covered the service as you would. And we were halfway through the service, and we were still laying the reeds, and we hadn't even got anywhere close to the end of that, when I could see this engineer climbing over the wall to where I was standing inside the Garden of Remembrance, and I was actually still commentating.
Live on air.
Live on air, and I lifted my earphone off like that and whispered in my ear, ring the newsroom urgently. And I looked at him. I must have said, do they not know? I'm not listening to the radio. Yeah. I'm on the air right now doing this very solemn service. And I looked at him and he went, ring the newsroom now. So the band struck up. At that point I thought, right, and then I just said, right, so now the band will play Abide With Me or whatever, right? At that point I turned off the microphone and I says, what do you mean? He says, something bad's happened, you've got to ring the newsroom, they can't get anybody else. So immediately he handed me this radio phone we had in the car, and I said, what is it? And he said, look, you're going to have to go down to Enniskillen. Why? There's been this explosion. So that was me. I was there 1 week later, I was still in Enniskillen, having covered the initial bombing. I think I'm right in saying I was the first non-Fermanagh journalist to arrive there, because I don't know how many speed records we were broken down at Robert. Went straight to Enniskillen and got there, and of course, what you saw when you got there was mayhem again, and but it was a long week for me personally, because I did about 5 or 6 funerals, one after the other, sometimes 2 or 3 in a day. And after that week, I got a call from the news editor who said, look, how are you getting on? I said, will I tell you something? I think I'm getting to the point of what I can only describe as grief overload. And I think it's time to bring a fresh pair of eyes into this.
I want to ask you about that because, and I know this is the tracing of your career and of your life experience. So you can't divorce, and you shouldn't divorce your career from the human effect of it. But we've talked there about deaths, hunger strikes, riots, sectarian killings, and all of that. And I really do want to talk about the people. But was there a period? Maybe there were many periods, but was there a point in time where Mervyn Jess said, I can't take this. I can't take any more of this. This is just not what I need as a human being. Did you ever get to that stage?
No, I didn't. That bit of grief overload, now that's me as a journalist speaking, I'm not comparing that to the families of the victims or anything like that there. That's just me working, through about maybe 5 or 6 families' grief and trying to reflect it in a way. And, they say that journalists can become dehumanised or desensitised to these things, and sometimes there's a level of desensitisation which is needed because you have to try to protect yourself too. And this wasn't really talked about back in those days. It's probably talked about much more now. But, by shutting yourself down completely and emotionally to cover a story like that, then I think you fail as a reporter because you have to an extent, try to reflect what it is those people are feeling, wherever that may be and whatever that is. And you've got to get behind the mask a bit to get that.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're putting a bit of yourself into it. Yeah. So it does have an impact, yes.
Yeah, that's a point.
And that's just something, that's just a necessary part of the job. And how you handle that is really much up to the individual, how to deal with it. Some people deal with it better than others. I know other people have had really bad experiences, but apart from that particular time, and then I joined the BBC near directly after that, the next time I felt anything like that was again, and this sounds like all I ever did was cover atrocities and major tragedies, was the Oma bombing, when I did interviews in a room with about 9 or 10 first responders, including ambulance, fire, police, describing the aftermath of the bombing, lifting the buckled buggies out of the wreckage with the children that were caught up in the explosion. That was a very difficult hour spent in a room with those people, asking them the questions that needed to be asked and listening to their responses and then responding to their responses. So those are probably the 2 times when I've really sort of felt it. But again, I seem to be able to deal with it in my own way. But I'd never made me say to myself, no, stop doing this job. Because I'd realised by that stage, even before that, that was the way we reported what went on here to the rest of our communities and to the wider world, if you were doing that as well, was an important job.
Oh, yeah, vital.
And if I wasn't doing it, then, who else was going to do it? And I had some of the experience, or quite a bit of the experience of dealing with the tragedy and the emotions and everything else that goes wrapped around a particular story of that nature. So I thought I'm as well placed as anybody to continue doing this, and I don't feel I should stop doing it, and I don't feel the need to stop doing it, so I didn't, and I kept doing it.
And it's almost as if I am obsessed with the BBC. What I'm trying to do is move you along from the different aspects of your career. Was it a different ball game working for the BBC? Was it, it's worldwide, it's a global broadcasting as opposed to no harm to downtown, but downtown's our downtown, and the Chronicle is even smaller. So, were you reluctant to go to the BBC? Did you think you were made? What was your feelings about that?
I have to say, when I was in downtown, I would have thought my natural path of progression would have been into UTV, because I had done work for ITN. Occasionally, whenever you would get to something first, and they didn't have anybody there, and they would ring you up, and you were the local independent broadcasting journalist. And for instance, I think I did Loch Gall, I think for ITN live on the News at 10. And that one, because I was one of the first journalists in Belfast to get there to that one. So it was a live hit on a phone line down to them. So the BBC, I didn't really see that as being my direction. But actually, strange things. The job came up, I applied for it, and I got it. And yes, it's a different beast altogether. It's much bigger. It's global. It has its own ways of doing things, and the way we did things in downtown, for instance, we would sort of, let's just say, we would cut a few corners to get.
Yeah.
They wouldn't cut corners; they had to do it this way. But because they were doing it that way, we were able to get the stuff on the air first. For instance, we would use what we called acoustic couplers, which is like a little closed-in loudspeaker, which plugged into your Marantz tape recorder, and you'd lift the phone down the street and you'd ring the newsroom and say, right, here's this interview with Jerry Adams, put the couple over it, hit play, they recorded it, went out in the air about 2 minutes later. BBC wouldn't do that. In those days, they had reel-to-reel, actual reel-to-reel, we had cassettes, and they had to bring the reel-to-reel back, cut it and splice it, and then put it on the air, via a team of engineers running tape machines. So we were lighter on our feet, much lighter on our feet. So we were beating them to the punch, left, right, and centre. And I think, to an extent, there was a realisation that they're going to have to sort of change the way they were working too, because that's the way it was going. And apocryphally, if you like, look at the way it went from the way you used to do things to what we're doing now. It's all instantaneous, smart device, blah blah blah. You can virtually go out and record a TV piece on a mobile phone in this day and age and put it to air nearly.
Barney Rowan tells, when he talks about you, can't resist telling stories about you and stories all good stuff and humorous stuff and all of that. When you moved from downtown into the BBC, was it the same camaraderie? Did you have that sense, or was it big newsrooms, big editors, all of that?
It was much bigger, more staff and all the rest of it, and bigger newsroom. And it takes a while to find your feet, and it took me 3 or 4 years probably to find my feet in there. And then, I was coming in at a time when a certain generation of some of the staff were sort of moving on too, because they were going through a bit of change as well, So after maybe 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden we were the up and coming new kids on the block, and it wasn't just me joined, others joined as well. And then we went through the next 10-year period, and all that ensued during that time. And that's what built that particular team. And again, all of a sudden you find there's a group of people there, maybe 15 to 20 people, who are constantly working nearly all the time together and covering those types of stories, and that became a fairly close-knit team. And yes, that camaraderie did eventually come about within the Beeb, only in a much bigger organisation.
I want to again move you on. This is all very unfair, but we're trying to get a lifetime of work into an hour, less than an hour. It's well known, and nobody would fault, but journalists have their sources. They have their ears to the ground. They're listening for signs. They're trying to pick stuff up. The Good Friday Agreement, or an agreement of some sort, is rattling around. It may be a possibility. I heard, she said, they said, I said, and trying to analyse different speeches coming out from, say, the British government, from Sinn Féin, and trying to read into them, trying to predict them. And some got it right and some got it wrong. But I'm told you had a very unique way of knowing that the Good Friday Agreement was going to come about. And it was
Rowan told you this story.
It was through Vargas. I possibly couldn't tell you
your source.
I could not tell you.
Fair enough.
But it was through Vargas' veins.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us that story?
Well, it was, as you say, it was the mid-80s, the mid-90s, building up towards, Good Friday Agreement, ceasefires and all the rest of it. And it was coming and going and pushing and pulling, and it's on, it's off, it's off, it's on. I wasn't particularly involved. The political department were all over the talks. I wasn't. I was on the outside looking in. But you were, your ears to the ground, and you're hearing things, and there's a lot of people outside of the talks process are saying things to you as well. So you have an idea that there's that and the other's happening, but nobody was quite sure if it was going to happen. So anyway, we were having these conversations in the newsroom nearly on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis, and somebody said, "Well, what do you think? What do you think? Well, what do you think?" And somebody said to me, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, all I can tell you is I was talking to my neighbour, who used to live across the road from us, Netta, and Netta was chatting to me. She says, you see those talks that's going on there at the minute? I don't know, but I think something's going to happen there." And I said, "Well, why do you think that, Ned?" I said, "It's because, my varicose veins are acting up. And every time my varicose veins act up,
there's
something happens, something goes down." So I thought, well, you know what? Ned, your veins are as good an indicator or a barometer of the political climate as anybody else at the minute, because they're all doing guesswork up there in the hill, right? So I threw that. That was my tuppence worth.
And it was right.
And it was right. And it was right. Yes.
You mentioned Lynn there. I mentioned Lynn, and you mentioned your two girls, the daughters. Rose, your mother, 90?
91.
91. You're the same age as me. How did, if you can recall, how did you react when you started to, not the stories, but you started to appear? This is a Cumber woman. When you started to appear on TV, was that my wee lads on TV? Or?
Oh, she'd ring you up and she said, you would just ring you up, you know, and she said to you, I saw you on the TV tonight. And I said, I know. I was on, I know, because that was me. That's what I do, you know.
You were wearing that shirt last week.
That's right, you know, and sometimes said, what were you wearing that jacket for? You've got to have a better jacket than that. Those sorts of things, you know. So yes, she would, and then if she missed you, you see, if she didn't see you for whatever reason, and she was up the street doing her shopping, somebody would say to her, I saw Mervyn on last night, and of course you get all embarrassed then because she hadn't seen me. So she would go, oh yes,
Yeah.
You know. And these are the days, you know, before like she really wasn't into video recording as much, you know, and so she couldn't go, or even fast rewind or instant replay. None of that was available, so she couldn't go back and look at it really, you know. And she wasn't one for like somebody say recording the news on a regular basis.
Yeah.
She'd be recording a program she'd watch, but not the news. So of course then she'd have to sort of remember, right, what time's that program of yours on at? And I had to say 6:30 to 7. And she'd have to make an effort to try to, just in case.
In case it clashes with Coronation Street.
Exactly, or whatever else was on that she wanted to watch, because she is a Formula One fan, a football critic, Olympics critic. She watches all those things and she has a view on everything.
Great for her.
Great, never stops.
You talked about, and maybe every generation does the same thing, nearly independent of what the profession is. And we talked about, and I lament the fact that when I'm recalling stories, and I make the point of saying, and there weren't any mobile phones.
Yeah.
And people go, what? You weren't mobile, you know? But one of the things I think that when you look back to that period that we all survived, which hopefully is gone, and you look at bewilderment or how people survive without counselling or without, you know, I'm not saying we all needed counselling or we all needed therapists, we all needed, but we just survived. Just you got through it and you done whatever your job was. Seamus Calters and yourself and other journalists and yourself are involved in an organisation. Is it DART?
The DART, yeah.
So explain
the DART organisation
that to me and tell me how it comes about.
Well, in a snapshot, people are going to say, DART, what's that? It's a family, a very wealthy family in America. And you're saying, well, where's the money come from? Well, if you picked up polystyrene cup with your coffee, get into it, and turn it upside, don't put the coffee on it first, just pick up the cup, turn it upside down. 9 times out of 10, on the bottom would have the word DART stamped on it, because they were the inventors, if you like, of the polystyrene, keep your drinks warm cup. Now, of course, that's gone on at the different sort of machinations since then, but still that, plus obviously investment and the one other things as well. They set up this course of study in Colombia University in ES, you know, one of the Ivy League universities, to look into trauma in journalism. Trauma within journalism, as in the journalists suffering the trauma of reporting the trauma around the world. And, you know, they had a lot of very important people feeding into it, and obviously quite a bit of money behind it, and it's still happening. So Seamus Calters, as you mentioned, obviously one of the co-authors of Lost Lives, was a very close colleague of mine. Seamus, actually, because of his writing and putting together of that particular book, which worldwide acclaim, became a fellow of the DART organisation, which is quite an honour. And then he was able to bring them to here, saying, look, you've spoken to people, the Middle East, Far East, the Oklahoma bombing, people reported it, wherever anything happened, but you haven't really come to Ireland as such. So they actually came over and did a sort of a weekend, like a seminar weekend, and we brought together a group of journalists from print and broadcasting, and took them way down south, somewhere outside Killarney, and we had basically together sessions talking through things that happened with facilitators, saying, well, you know, how did you deal with that? How did you deal with this? And it was all recorded and kept as a part of the research into journalists and trauma, and that still goes on. And now all of a sudden trauma is a big thing. I mean, the NUJ, which I was a a member of, and also an official for many years in the BBC Chapel, is at this moment in time, still looking into ways of helping journalists who have suffered from trauma, not always to do with being in a really bad place, but some of the trauma is to do with the way they're being treated and spoken about on social media, because of the way they've reported certain things. That's the other beast that's come, in the intervening period that was never there before. Like that was once the cap come off that bottle, you're never putting that one back on again.
Never be back.
No,
Right.
So that's another thing entirely, and I don't engage with social media at all for a number of reasons. I'll not say what they all are.
It's okay.
People say to me, "You'd be absolute liability on social media because you'll say the wrong, you'll type the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then that'll be it." And I said, "Oh, fair enough, because I'm not what you call that media. I'm not that social media savvy, so I'll let that one go." Okay, but yes, they do good work, and I've been over to a few things, and there was one in Stockholm I went to, spoke to people over there about here. There's the Frontline Club in London, which maybe I've heard of, where where a lot of war reporters would go along and have again evenings talking about their work. Photographers, stills and moving image.
Do you find, this is a broad question, but in our society, the conflict that impacted on us all, some more than others. Do you find that when you go to these events with other members of the press, the wider press, that a lot of the feelings that you perhaps had during these horrific incidents, you identify with others in the room who have experienced the same thing, and then you're able to put it together. You're able to go, yeah, I feel like that.
You do get a bit of that, yes.
Or are we unique?
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Like people working, for instance, in places like the Turkish-Armenian border, or the Middle East and Beirut, etc., and places like that during the 70s and what have you. There are certain similarities, but by no means transfers completely across. And what went on here was unique in a lot of respects, especially for the journalists, because we worked and lived in a very small community. I mean, you did the job during the day, but you went home at night.
Yeah.
You didn't go to a hotel like Europa, stay there for 3 weeks and then fly back to wherever you came from. You lived here. This was your home. And that's the important difference, I think, in many respects, about us covering what is seen globally as like this war for the best part of 30 years, and other people flying in, as we used to call them, the parachutees, who would just drop in whenever things get really bad, do their bit, and then fly off and go somewhere else. We actually had to live it, and we raised families in the middle of it too. And you could say to yourself, well, does that make it more difficult to cover it, or to make it easier? I don't know the answer to that question, actually. Both my children are out of this country, living and working. Would I have wanted them to stay here during the Troubles? No, I'd have actively encouraged them to get, and not so much just to live, but to actually go and get another viewpoint, get another aspect on life, living somewhere that didn't have at that stage, and to an extent, still now to this day, in some areas, that sectarianism, that viewpoint that will not shift. I wanted them to get views from other types of people, other ethnic backgrounds, other ways of living. So I'm hoping they're getting that where they are. I'm not saying I wouldn't want them to come back and live here now. I'm not saying that at all, but that's the difference, I think, between journalists in Northern Ireland who live and bring their families and work here to maybe some other areas of the world.
I described you when we began, and we're almost finished, you'll be glad to hear, but I described you when we began as a journalist, and whether you identify yourself with it is another matter. I also said that you had retired, which is not true, right? Because I don't know whether you ever retire. I'm told that if you ever give up the writing, that you have a career as a Johnny Cash singer. You do a very mean Johnny Cash song. Is that true? Because we can book you for Scéalta if you've got time.
Well, maybe if the Maze was still open, I could have done it there, since it's Folsom Prison Blues is my party piece, okay? Right? But of course, that's gone now. So it's the sort of song I would do, but Joe, I don't really do it amongst a very select number of people. For the reason being, I wouldn't want to inflict it on the greater, wider public.
There's only 20 or 30,000 people who feel it. How do you relax? What does Mervyn Jess do when he isn't kicking the TV or tearing up the paper or commentating in his head on other events? What do you do to relax?
Well, I mean, when the cinemas were open, I'd be quite a eager cinema goer. Yeah. I'm a great film buff. Do a bit of reading. When I was able to, still play a bit of five-a-side, but play a bit of football. Not to any great level, but to the level I was able to play at, and then the team that we were in, we actually had with some good successes. So I enjoyed the game and have done all my life. So there's that. Travel when it was still an option, as in travelling further afield than just flying to London and back, or travelling down to Dublin for the day, was also something which I enjoyed and will hopefully enjoy again. Just basically to see different people in different cultures and different parts of the world. So that's been it. Because that list is quite short, it shows you how all-consuming the job has been over the past 30 odd years. Because even though you were off shift, you were never really off shift, because if something happened.
And are you off shift now?
Well, I'm retired now, right?
No, that's not the question.
But if I was to walk out
that's a BBC answer.
If I would walk out that door and something was to happen on that street in front of me, right, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to get my phone out of my pocket and start recording it, and then I'm going to ring somebody and say, I've got some great footage here, okay? So no, you're never really, you're never really off as such, because when you start out in this profession, that's it. And that's it for life to an extent, I think.
Walter Mackin, who's an Irish writer, talked about, in the kind of intro to one of his books, he talked about that you can take the man from the bog, but you can never take the bog from the man.
Yes.
So you can take the journalist out of the job, but you can never take that incentive out of the person. And I suspect you're one of those people who's always got that kind of other view of life.
I think that goes for a lot of journalists. I do think that applies to a lot of people.
I think it does. Okay, I think it does. This is the last question, and I said tell you there are no trick questions, and there aren't any. But
just to tee this up for you, you can ask this question obviously, and I'll do my best to answer it, whatever it is. But I'm going to tell you a story after it. Okay.
Okay, fine. You can have the last word.
All right.
Because if you work for the Beeb, you always get the last word. When you look out and you look at young reporters, predominantly female reporters now, I'm glad to say. Certainly in the olden days there wasn't that many female reporters, and I'm glad to say there are more. Perhaps not enough, but there are more. Do you see their job, leaving the conflict aside, because the conflict being over or finished or almost is good for everybody in my view, but when you see their job, do you reflect it's harder to be a journalist now with all the modernizations of the trade, or is it easier, or we wouldn't have got away with that? Do you look at life like that?
I don't really. I mean, for instance, this generation's big story obviously is the pandemic.
Yeah, of course.
And prior to that, it would have been the Brexit, which obviously is still rolling on.
Yeah.
So we can always say, well, sure, we covered the story of the last 30 years, the Troubles, and that's gone. So you'll never ever do that.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But by the same token, they're actually doing other big stories in their lifetimes. And here, who knows what's coming after this pandemic? So, times change, and, there's different people come in to pick up the baton and run with it during those change times. So I don't really take a view on, we were better than them or they're better than us. I just say, look, there's a story to be covered, whatever it is, and you got to get out there and cover it to the best of your ability.
And I'm not giving you advice.
Unless somebody was to ask you for it. But for me to walk in, or anybody to walk in and start dictating terms to, the current generation and saying that's not the way to do it, they're going to say, well, it is actually, because this is why we're doing it this way, and it's because it's all to do with social media now, and you know nothing about that. And I have to go, right, mea culpa on that one. So yes, that's the way it should be. I think everything has its own time, and to an extent my time has come and gone, and I'm now in a retirement.
No, it's not.
But anyway,
we've been talking for an hour.
Yes.
And first of all, I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
I'm going to leave you with, as you always did in your profession, I'm going to leave you with the last word. So you tell us the story.
Well, a lot of what we've talked about here has been about the dark days, because that was a main predominant theme of my journalism, unfortunately. But there you go. But and I mentioned the black humour that we had to try to counteract that amongst ourselves. But there were also some really, weird moments and some stories that came out of those times. For instance, I remember till the day I put the lid on, it was one of the hunger strikers' funerals. It wasn't Bobby Sands, it was one of the ones that followed him. And during that time, Sinn Féin had a media call, and they suggested that all the media was here from around the world, obviously, that the only way the media could operate within West Belfast and Republican areas was to carry a Sinn Féin press card. Mm-hmm. So journalists in Belfast had a meeting organised by the union to say, what are we going to do about this? And everybody who was a working journalist in Northern Ireland was at it, more or less. And we decided, we're not taking this because we've got our card.
Your own NUJ
It's the NUJ card.
Yeah.
And we're not going to start, because if we take a card from Sinn Féin, or the IRA,
yeah.
we're going to take a card from the government.
Yeah.
You know?
Where do you go?
Where do you go with that? Where's that end?
Yeah.
Are we going to take one from the loyalists?
Yeah.
So, you know, it was just something was never going to stop. So we said, no, we're going to go in and operate as we've always operated, no matter what comes. We'll have to just take it in the chin. So, of course, tension was high in the community anyway. Yeah. Tension was high amongst the working journalists, yeah. particularly the local ones, because they knew, you know, they're going to know us before they know anybody else,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I was up at this funeral, and it was up in Andy Town, and I was there trying to keep as low a profile as I could for downtown. And I had my recorder inside my jacket, hanging over my shoulder, and my microphone shoved in the inside pocket. But obviously you're there to observe and to take notes. And as I was standing outside, large, massive crowd outside, lots of guys running around with black leather jackets on. Sorry, I'll do that again, because I touched on it. Lots of guys running around outside with black leather jackets on, and they were scanning the crowds. And I could see two of them in particular looking at me, standing on my Jack Jones, if you like. And I thought, oh no, I think I've been spotted here. And then I could see them chatting to each other, and then they actually spoke to some woman pointing over, and she was pointing over at me, and I was looking around like,
this is the time to go.
This is the time. Is it the time to run, or do I work for RTE, or who do I work for? So these two boys made their way through the crowd ever closer, and I was trying my best not to look at them. And eventually they're standing either side of me, and they said to me, "You're a reporter?" And at that point, you're going, "Well, what do you say?" I says, "Yes, I am." "Is your name Mervyn Jess?" And I thought, well, that's it. The game's up. They even know who I am. I went, "Yes, I am." "You work for Downtown Radio, don't you?" And I went, "Yes, I do." And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a bit of paper and he said, "Would you give that request a Big T?"
And Big T was a disc jockey.
Big T was a disc jockey. I says, "Certainly." Anything else? So there, in the midst of all of that, people were still going, "You know what, it's my granny's birthday this weekend, I'm having Downtown. Get that wee request on there for her, you know, she'll love that." Even in the midst of all of that.
And maybe there's the new book. Maybe that's what you should be reading.
The Other Side of the Troubles, the black humour. Some of it's printable, a lot of it isn't.
A lot of it's just good for a social night.
Correct.
So we'll book you. We'll remember that. Listen, our time is up.
Okay, Joe.
And as you can see, we're both been told stop talking.
Indeed.
So I want to thank you. I know you're busy, and I know you have different other stuff that you have to be doing. Thank you. I found it very entertaining and also very informative. So Mervyn Jess, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.